I'm back again. So I'm just going to do 5, 6, 7, and 8 today, but again, doing them all within separate lectures. So here we are. We are moving on to chapter 7, where we are talking about memory. Memory is a 3-part process. So you have encoding, storage, and retrieval. So you hear things, you see things, smell things, whatever it is, you sense them. And then you perceive them, which means that you understand them and put them into their own little things that help you understand them. Now, the way that you understand them, you kind of already know if you're going to need to remember it or not. So, for example, whenever I talk in these lectures, you know, oh, hey, she's saying this is going to be on the test. This is kind of important. Your brain takes that and kind of manipulates that in a way into helping you remember that you need to remember it, and it helps you incorporate that into storage. Okay, so first step in memory, the process by which information gets into memory storage, is encoding. So you recognizing, hey, I need to know this, and the way that you understand that information, that's all part of encoding. So sensory information is collected, sight, sound, smells, etc., and it's converted into neural activity, whether you know it or not. It's a process called transduction, and that is where you take things that you see, smell, hear, taste, whatever it may be, and you turn it into electrical activity in your brain. And that's how it gets into the storage part of things. Okay? It is encoded and either stored for later use, or you say, oh, she didn't say this was going to be on the test. It's not important. Don't worry about it. And you forget it, depending on what you're doing. And that's the storage part of it. Again, whenever it comes to memory, hippocampus. Okay? Your hippocampus is your biggest part of your brain used for memory. And that is not where the memories are stored, but it helps you recognize, oh, hey, this is important, this is not important, and it turns it into data that your mind can manage and then kind of puts it away. So that's the function of the hippocampus. It forges new memories and helps you remember what's important. The actual storage of memories is someplace different. It's actually part of the limbic system, but completely separate story. We'll get there eventually. Anyway, now retrieval. Think back to the Harry Potter movies if you saw those. Remember how they had the Hall of Secrets or whatever it was, and they had all of those little orbs with prophecies in them? Your brain is a lot like that. You have all of this information stored in there. And just like the Hall of Mysteries, yeah, that was it, Hall of Mysteries, or like a crane vending machine. You know how you have those little machines that you go and you put in a quarter and you try and get out a stuffed bear? Your brain works like that. Your brain has to go through and catalog all of this information, and then whenever somebody asks you, what's the Pythagorean theorem, it has to go through and sort through all of those shelves or sort through all of those stuffed animals in your vending machine and pull out what you need. This is why your brain's amazing, because it does all of this for you. Not only does it maintain your heartbeat, your blood pressure, your blood sugar, then you have all of these other things that you have to remember, and your brain controls all of this. So that kind of picking out what you need to remember and being able to regurgitate that information on tests, etc., that's retrieval. The process of accessing memories that have been encoded and stored. Now, in the PowerPoint, there's a pretty cool little video that I'm pulling up right now, actually, and a lot of actually this comes from Brain Games. This is one where they had like this big public arena where there's like a street vendor going around, and then they stage a kidnapping or a robbery. They stage a robbery. And then they sat there and they asked people what they remembered to test how accurate their memory was. Spoiler alert, not very. I typically do this in the classroom where I will show the video and then I'll go through and ask people what they remember. Unfortunately, I do not have that luxury here. But if I did, that's what we'd be doing. Divided attention, focusing on more than one thing at a time. So, saying, oh, I need to do this, I need to focus on this, but then also, it's multitasking, basically. But with your brain. So focusing or concentrating on more than one thing at a time. Sustained vigilance or sustained attention is the ability to maintain attention to a selected stimulus for a prolonged period of time. Again, for you guys that don't know, my son was diagnosed with ADHD at a point, and this was not a thing. Turns out, it actually is a thing if it's something that he likes. If it's video games, he can do that for hours, no problem. But whenever it comes to him sitting down at a classroom and learning, he can't do that. So we have to, he does not have very long sustained attention. But we work around that, in that we break down his work into smaller chunks, smaller increments. He gets breaks, stuff like that. And he's done really, really well with that. Not everyone can do these things, but for him, that seems to really work. For people, some people, sustained attention, it's not a thing. And honestly, if you are one of these people, this class is probably really difficult for you, because you have to sit down and read the book, and you may not be able to make it through a whole chapter. You may have to break it up into chunks. Perfectly acceptable. Do that. And actually, that increases your retention. The less you take in, more in intervals, the more you try and cram it all in there, the worse this gets. So, yeah, going along with that. Your levels of processing, again, kind of a continuum. Memory processing from shallow to intermediate to deep. Whenever you process information, it's not like somebody's going to come back and ask you, hey, remember the other day when Dross recorded that lecture? What color shirt was she wearing? You're probably not retaining information at that level. But if somebody asks you, does Dross wear glasses? Yeah, that part's pretty obvious. Plus, you see me a lot, almost always with glasses. So, different level of attention there. So hopefully that helps. Let's see, what else am I missing here? I feel like I'm missing something here. Self-reference. Here we go. Self-reference is forming a number of connections around a stimulus at any given point of memory or encoding, or kind of going along with that, elaboration. More specifically, self-reference is a form of elaboration. So things that you can do to help you remember these things. I try and give you my personal stories, because that's what's helped me understand these concepts. As I studied these things, I was like, oh, hey, I know a time when that's happened to me. Well, unfortunately, you kind of have to do that for yourself, because I'm not you. But elaboration is forming a number of new connections around a stimulus at any given point. Whenever I give something to you and I give you an example, trying to relate it to your own experiences, that's me trying to get that into your brain and encode that into your memory. Again, levels of processing were shallow, intermediate, or deep. For me, I'm not a math person. Never have been. I think I've told you guys this plenty of times before. So for me, a deep level of processing for math was never going to happen. I was going to know what I needed to know in order to pass tests, and then I was going to be done. But the deeper you process these things, the more you understand the concept, and the more you can learn about it. So hopefully that helps. Atkinson-Shiffrin theory. Theory suggests that memory operates in stages, and these stages represent a flow of information. Okay? For this, there are 3 types of memory storage. Okay? So, you have your sensory memory. Okay? Whenever you hear me speak, that is part of your sensory memory. And there is a lot that happens here. Okay? I talk very fast, and you remember this for a very brief moment. And you have to pick out what you're going to put away and store for a time that you're going to be able to recall it, or whenever I'm babbling on and you can discard it. Okay? This is why sensory memory is so incredible. Because every day we see and hear millions and millions of things. Do we remember all of it? Nope. We can't. Wish we could. We'll talk about eidetic memory a little bit later and how people think that it's a good thing, but it can actually have some limitations as well. Your sensory memory is what hears and kind of briefly stores in memory, or sees and stores briefly in memory. Okay? And it is just there to tell your brain, hey, you're going to need this later, or no, not so much. Your short-term memory holds information for a longer period, about 30 seconds. Okay, I was right on that. I couldn't remember if I was remembering correctly or not. Holds information for about 30 seconds. Now, here's where I don't like this. There's another part of this, and it's called working memory. This is not part of the Atkinson-Shiffrin theory, okay? But going along with this, how does information get to where it is stored long term? That information has to be manipulated in a certain way. It has to be kind of played around with, like Play-Doh almost. And that's where working memory comes in. This is where your brain comes up with little tips and tricks on how to help you remember these things. Okay? Part of that is, one way that you can do this is something called chunking. So, phone numbers, social security numbers, things like that. You break it down. So, 850, you have the area code. 201, 3333, or whatever the TCC's phone number is. I honestly don't remember. I think it's like 3333 or 4444. I don't know. But you break it down into shorter chunks of numbers. And it makes that information more manageable. Grouping letters, numbers, other items into meaningful subsets is a strategy for increasing the quantity of information that can be maintained in short-term memory. Rehearsal is repetition of information to commit to memory. So, whenever actors have to memorize lines and they go every day and repeat the same lines over and over and over again, that's rehearsal. And then long-term memory, kind of going along with that. Time frames up to a lifetime. You can probably remember things from when you were a kid. Maybe the way something smelled, maybe the way your house was decorated, maybe, there's no telling. Long-term memory, that stays there for as long as you need it. And sometimes it's not always easy to recall. Long-term memory can be separated into explicit and implicit. This kind of goes along too with Tulving. Tulving was a big pioneer whenever it came to memory. So, alright, here's what I did. In the book, working memory is 221, 222. I'm coming back to that. Give me a couple slides, but I'm coming back to that. I want to skip forward to long-term memory first. Okay? Relatively permanent type of memory that stores huge amounts of information for a lifetime. And again, implicit and explicit memory. So your explicit memory is declarative, conscious recollection of information, such as specific facts or events, and at least in humans, information that can be verbally communicated. So if I ask you, who was the first president of the United States? Happy President's Day, by the way. George Washington. Boom. That is explicative. I can tell you that. Okay? Now, if I ask you, hold on, I want to make sure that I'm explaining this correctly. Okay. So if I ask you to think about maybe a boyfriend or girlfriend's perfume or cologne, you may be able to give me adjectives that describe it, but your implicit memory is going to recall that. Okay? And you can give me examples. You can try and put it into words, but implicit memory is just, and it's based on your experience or your episode. You may think of a place where you smelled it. You may think of that person's face. Implicit memory is much more abstract. Okay, it's much more experiential. Whereas explicative memory or explicit memory, that can be put into words and it's just more general knowledge. And that was what Tulving proposed, the difference between implicit and explicit memory. So keep that in mind. There probably will be some type of question about that on the tests, but how deep I'm going to go with it, I don't honestly know. We'll see. Flashbulb memory. I told you guys in the last chapter, and I'll say it again. Emotional memories are your strongest. Things that provoke a conditioned emotional response. Episodic memory, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. Whenever you have big, major, life-changing moments, you kind of almost have like an out-of-body experience or something, and it's called a flashbulb memory, because you know that memory is important, and your brain is taking note of that and taking in as much sensory information as it can in order to help you remember that later. So, and this happens when circumstances are emotionally significant or whenever things are shocking. I have a friend that died, and I can recall the details of that day perfectly, especially that incident. I can tell you what we talked about that morning before it happened. I can tell you what happened whenever they found his body. I can tell you everyone's reactions. I can tell you so much about it, because it was a very, very scary, horrible day for me. And my brain knew that there was a lot of information that it needed to take in, and it did a really good job of it, sometimes almost too well. But and I can piece it all together. I mean, not perfectly, but I can remember where I saw things whenever I found things out, where I was. 9/11 is a really good, bad example of this. People can tell you where they were whenever they found out about it. Back older generations, the space shuttle that exploded, they can tell you where they were when that happened. For people who are around when JFK was shot, again, happy President's Day, but they can tell you where they were and what they were doing. Some people can even tell you sounds, smells, things like that. Some people can tell you what they had for lunch that day that happened. And all of that is part of flashbulb memory. And it's like an episode. It's like watching an episode of a TV show. You know, there's a lot of information, and it takes that in, and the ability to recall that and be able to voice that is a big deal. So, implicit memory, again, memory is something that you know how to do, maybe conscious or automatic, and you don't know, but it's based on experience. And your procedural memory is more unconscious, just like driving. Whenever you get from one place to another, especially if you take the same route every day, it's procedural. You know how to get from point A to point B. But I'm willing to bet that if I say, hey, can you give this person directions to wherever they need to go, it's going to be harder than actually doing it. So, going on back to short-term memory and working memory. Alright, so short-term memory works for about 30 seconds, right? So how does something go from 30 seconds into a lifetime? This is where working memory comes in. Excuse me. So, you have something called a phonological loop. This is your hearing memory. So, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Yeah, it's been a while since I've done that. But that is stored in my phonological loop. I heard that enough. I've watched enough Sound of Music. I've done enough choral stuff. That is in my brain. Now, you also have what is called a visuospatial sketchpad. I want you to think about your living room right now. And if I ask you to describe your living room to me, you say, well, then you're going to come in, and then you're going to go to the left, and then the couch is going to be on the left-hand side, and then over across in front of you is going to be the TV, and then there's a bookshelf on the far left corner. That's part of your visuospatial sketchpad. I actually put that in there. I didn't know I did that. Blue's Clues, how he sits there and sketches out something. That's kind of what your visuospatial sketchpad does. It kind of gets a blueprint of wherever you are or wherever you need to be. Phonological loop, component of working memory that deals with verbal or speech-based information. Visual-spatial sketchpad, where the visual and spatial information is stored and manipulated. Again, I think of Steve's notepad from Blue's Clues. Your central executive, we talked about this before. Working memory that directs attention, makes plans, coordinates activities. And again, how people with ADHD or developmental delays may have impaired central executive. But this is where that manipulation of memories takes place. Okay? So, metaphors. I do a lot of metaphors. We talked a little, I used one just a brief bit ago. Okay? That works really well for me because I think my phonological loop is probably a little bit better than my visual spatial sketchpad. I'm not a puzzle person. I can't sit there and put pieces in places. I'm not that kind of person. But what I can do is that once I understand a concept well enough, I can relate it to another verbal concept. And that's where these things become, a little bit more valuable. So this is the way to think about it. Think about it in terms of a library. I'm on slide 8 right now, by the way. Kind of skipping around a little bit. Sorry about that. Think of it in terms of a library. Short-term memory is the shelving system. Okay? And then your working memory is like the librarian who sorts the books and puts them where they need to go. So, if you want to go with your Hall of Mysteries comparison with the Harry Potter movies, the shelf that those little orbs are on, that's your short-term memory. How those memories are organized, that's part of your working memory. So, it's kind of abstract and it's kind of hard to explain, but hopefully you kind of get the idea. If not, let me know. But, a lot of times, for example, somebody gives you a piece of paper. You can sit there, and if you need to put it into a pocket, you can fold it up. That's what working memory does. Working memory makes the memories more manageable, and it helps you remember them. It helps you fit it into the space that you need it to fit into in your brain. Okay? Your short-term memory is the actual housing of it. Okay? So hopefully that helps you understand a little bit. Scripts and schemas. A schema is a pre-existing mental concept or framework to help you organize information. So, whenever you walk into a library, you have a schema of what happens there. You don't go running up and down the aisles naked. You know that it's a quiet, dignified, hopefully, place. That's your mental concept. So, you see a big building with a lot of books in it. Boom, you think library. Now your script is what happens in those things. Okay? So, again, whenever you walk into a library, to be quiet. You don't put feet up on tables, or you don't go dancing down the halls like it's some horrible episode of Glee or something. You know that it's a quiet, dignified place, and you behave accordingly. And if you don't know what to do, guess what you do? Observational learning. You watch others around you so that you behave accordingly. Another example of this is a doctor's visit. So the schema is the situation. You may go in, you fill out the paperwork, you give it to the desk staff. That's a schema. Whenever you see somebody coming in scrubs, taking vital signs, you know what's happening. Whenever you see the guy in the white coat, you know that's the person that's going to be evaluating you, that you're going to be giving your private information to. That's the cue that it's time for that portion of the doctor's appointment. And you know all that just by looking at people, by these people's clothing, their demeanor, things like that. So that's scripts and schemas. Script is your overall basic knowledge of the concept, or your schema. Your script is going to be how you behave in those situations. Lashley's Rats, talking about connectionism. It's a model that suggests memories are distributed through the brain in a network of interconnected neurons. So here's the deal. Lashley took these rats and put them in a maze. Okay? Then he cut different areas of their brain, but they still had enough knowledge of the maze to make it through. That's called long-term potentiation, the increased efficiency of neural communication over time, resulting in learning and memory formation. If you do something enough, if it's rehearsed enough, it sticks with you, even when that part of the brain is damaged. Long-term potentiation also plays a role in Alzheimer's disease. So, there's a really good video, and actually I don't have it posted, but I probably should. There's a guy named Clive Wearing. Clive Wearing was a musician, and he actually taught at a university, orchestra, something of the like, I forget. But he has damage to his brain. He cannot form new memories. So whenever you tell him something, it'll stick around for about 30 seconds, and then he forgets. And it's really, really interesting. But he keeps rehearsing, and he can still play. He can still play and sing and do all of these great musical things. But if you sit there and you say A, B, C, D, and then you ask him, what did I just say to you 1 minute ago? He's not going to be able to recall. Retrieval, when information is stored in memory and comes out of storage. So whenever you go into your Hall of Mysteries and you pull out the orb that you need to remember, you are retrieving something. Retrieval cues are stimuli that help in the retrieval of stored information that is difficult to access. So a lot of times when people give you hints, that's kind of a retrieval clue. Priming is the stimulation of memories as a result of retrieval cues in the environment. So, I'm trying to think of one. I can't think of one right now. Maybe I'll think of one later. If I sit there and I give you a hint. So, maybe I say, whenever you hear psychoanalytic, you should think of, we all know it should be Freud, but maybe you can't remember that. So I say, sounds like Boyd. Or I say, id, ego, and superego. You're like, oh yeah, that's Freud. But those cues are what help you remember, and priming is you being able to remember that as a result of those cues. Hopefully that makes sense. Recall the process of retrieving information held in long-term memory without the help of explicit retrieval cues. And recognition. Alright, so here's how I explain this. Your study guides are recall. I ask you the question and I don't give you any hints. It is your job at that point to take the study guide, go through the book, go through the PowerPoints, whatever, and find your answers. Okay? However, your tests are recognition, which means I don't ask you, unconscious thoughts are associated with this theorist, and I leave it blank. You have choices, and all you have to do is be able to recognize the correct choice. So whenever I give you a study guide, if I can sit there and say, oh, this person is unconscious processes, and you automatically say, Freud, that's recall. Well, if you can recall it, then you can definitely recognize it. So I'll be like, unconscious thoughts, and then I have a list of 4 people. I have Bandura, I have Watson, I have Maslow, and I have Freud. You being able to pick Freud out as the right answer is recognition. You guys got that right? Hopefully. That may end up being a test question. I don't know. We'll see. Relearning. Material that was learned previously is acquired more quickly in subsequent exposures. If I went back and took a math class now, I would probably do better than when I did preliminarily going through college, because I've been there and I've done it now. Serial position effect. So you have something called the primacy effect and the recency effect. So I give you a chunk of data. The stuff I give you at the beginning and the stuff that's at the end, you're going to remember more clearly than the stuff in the middle. Yeah. Serial position effect just means that your ability to remember is influenced by where it is in the serial data. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, primacy, primary, first. The first few you're going to remember. Last few, recency. They're the most recent, so it'll help you remember. If you don't believe me, find a friend. Find a sibling. Give them a list of 5 things from the grocery store and see what they can remember. They're going to remember the first couple and they're going to remember the last couple, but those things in the middle, not going to be able to remember. Encoding specificity principle. Memories are more easily recalled when the context and the cues are available at the time of encoding are similar to those at the time of retrieval. That's why learning in a classroom is actually beneficial, because you take tests in the same place that you learn the information. So that helps you remember the information that you need to recall. Hopefully that makes sense. Forms of sensory memory. You have iconic memory, which is visual impressions. They're kind of like photographs. And their accuracy, but they don't stick around very long. So if I show you a picture of the Mona Lisa, just flash it up really quick. And then say, okay, what do you notice about that? You're not going to have a whole lot of very distinct, very thorough memories. They'll go through quickly. Echoic memory is exact copies of what we hear. There are some people who do really good impressions and sound almost exactly like the people that they're trying to impersonate. They have great echoic memory and can somehow generate those same sounds. I don't know. Very lucky. Why we forget. Encoding failure. Sometimes your brain says this isn't important and throws it away. But then later on you're like, oh crap, I need to remember this. So you're running late for class, you set down your homework, and then you're like, oh crap, I forgot my keys. You went and go get your keys, you run out the door, and then you forget your homework. It's just an encoding failure. You're preoccupied with something else, so you forget that. Storage failure and memory decay. As we get older, the less we remember. We can't keep infinite amount of information in our brain, unfortunately. And then tip of the tongue phenomenon. This has probably happened to everybody at some point, where you're like trying to remember somebody's name and you're like, what was that person's name? It started with a J. Jessica. You remember that it starts with a J. It's on the tip of your tongue, but you can't get it out. Mnemonic device, Roy G. Biv. So you remember all of the first letters in something to help you remember the whole concept. So colors in a rainbow, Roy G. Biv. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. Not as weird as the method of Loci. There's a video of this. This guy with a great memory actually uses it. So you walk into a house and, again, your visual sketch pad, some people's are better than others, but you associate each room in the house with something that you need to pick up from the grocery store. People can do that. I can't. I don't. But people can. So, and that's the method of Loci, is you take a little walk in your head and you go visit each room in the house, and that helps you remember where these items are that you need to pick up so that you can go get them from the grocery store. Watch the video. I promise it makes a lot more sense with the video. Misinformation effect, the tendency for new and misleading information obtained after an incident to distort one's memory of it. Again, the video on this is great. Talking about in the beginning that fake robbery in brain games. So they will have somebody give somebody false information, and then they just go off with those same memories. And it's not that they're lying, but their memory is being affected by what others have told them. And those are rich false memories. Recollections of an event that may or may not have occurred. That's rich false memories. And this is why hypnosis was such a big deal, kind of tying it back to last chapter, or chapter 5 rather. The more information we get, be it accurate or inaccurate, the more we can recall it, the more we incorporate it into our daily dealings. And that's one thing that people are scared of with hypnosis. They're scared, well, did this actually happen, or is this kind of what the psychologist suggested? So now they think that this is what happened. And last but not least, amnesia. Did I actually include Clive Wearing in here? Maybe I did. I don't know. Let's find out. I did! Yes! Go me! I didn't even realize that I'd kept it in there. Clive Wearing, the guy I was talking about before. It is actually on slide 18. And it shows the extent of his memory. And then the retrograde amnesia is the inability to access memories from before a period of damage. So it is a former football player, and he slipped in the bathroom and hit his head, and he cannot recall anything from before that incident. So that's pretty interesting too. But yeah, so those are the different types of amnesia. Hopefully that helped, and I'm going to call that one a do. That's chapter 7. Let me know what questions you have.